What a boring topic. However, having the correct weight of recoil spring in your gun is going to make a difference. Now, it's going to make more of a difference if your skill level is more advanced beyond the novice, but nevertheless it's going to make a difference in some way or another. And I'll demonstrate how the different weights of recoil springs are going to affect your gun. But I noticed it in the past when watching some other younger shooters shooting, and they were shooting an edge similar to this. Now the edge, you know, the STI edge is real heavy. It's made with a long full-length dust cover to add a little extra weight in the barrel and the muzzle to keep the muzzle rise from coming up on your shooter. You can also put tungsten guide rods in here. It's got a bull barrel. All of this adds a lot more weight to keep the recoil down. And what that does is it allows you to get a faster follow-up shot. So your first shot, the gun rises and it comes back down. Well, if your firearm's real light, it's going to rise up a lot more. It's going to take longer to come down. So people like to add a lot of weight right here. But they're not thinking about recoil spring as well. If you have too heavy a recoil spring, when the slide closes, it's going to do a nosedive on you, and that's going to affect how fast you can get that second shot. Also, with a too heavy recoil spring, your slide's not going to stay back long enough rather. It's going to come all the way back, but it's not going to stay far enough or long enough back in order to strip the next round off the magazine. So you could get some failures to feed if your recoil spring was too heavy. Now, also, if you put a too light a recoil spring, you could do a little damage between your frame and slide, but there's buffers and such that you can put in there for that. So finding that perfect balance in between the two is the goal, basically. And my gun, this gun here, is tuned for the load that I created specifically for competing in IPSC and USPSA. So if you're going to go this route and compete with your gun, get your loads right so that you have the right power factor, the velocity times the weight of the bullet. And then once you get your loads the way you want them, then tweak your recoil spring a little bit more. And I have some high-speed video here to show you, and I'm going to show you a few different recoil springs as well as the STI Recoil Master, which is a dual spring system. I mean, there's a few manufacturers out there that I believe that do make this dual spring. Here's the main spring, or the first spring, and then there's another spring right here. But anyways, let's go to some of the high-speed video and I'll talk you through it. Okay, so this first video we're seeing is an 18-pound recoil spring. This is my standard IPSC loads, and I've sped the film up. Now we're looking at it at its way it was filmed originally at 600 frames per second. You notice that when the slide comes all the way to its rearward position, that it doesn't really stay there very long. In fact, there's almost no weight whatsoever. It comes forward. As soon as it goes back, it comes forward. And notice the dip, the nosedive from the muzzle. This I attribute to an 18-pound or an oversprung gun, if you will. So now we'll take a look at it super slow motion. So the gun goes off, comes back, almost no weight whatsoever on the slide, and it comes forward again. Strips the next round out of the magazine and closes. But the 18-pound spring, in my opinion, with my IPSC loads, and these are 170 power factor, is just too much for my taste. I like my gun to shoot a little bit flatter, and this gun tends to dip a little too much with that spring. So now let's go to the 14-pound spring, and this is sped up again. And here it is in real time. Now this is a spring I normally use. Notice there's a little bit more hesitation at the rear. The slide stays at its rearward position just a little bit longer than the 18 did, and there is still some dipping in the muzzle, but not quite as much than the 18-pound. so that the gun in a way stays a lot more level when you're shooting. So and my belief is it gives me faster follow-up shots. Not to mention that slide staying all the way back gives more reliable feeding. And here it is in super slow motion again. Once again, 600 frames per second, slowed down considerably. Notice the hesitation there at the end. The slide stays back a lot longer than the 18-pound spring. And that's key. You want that slide to stay open longer than instantly, if you will. You want to give the magazine enough time to push that next round up. If the slide closes before that next round can get up there, it's basically going to not put a round in the chamber. It'll just pass right over the magazine without stripping a round. Now this is a 7-pound recoil spring with my major IPSC loads, or USP PSA loads. Here it is in 600 frames per second again. Notice how long the slide stays open. It's considerably longer than the 14-pound. It may not be as evident here, but it will be when we show the slow motion. But look at, there's virtually no dip in the muzzle. So after the slide closes, there's almost no dip. This is going to give you, like I said, should give your sight picture faster alignment for that second shot. Here it is in super slow motion. Watch how long the slide stays open. Here we go. Look how long, it's like eternity. And that should give it way plenty time, if you will, to get that next round out. And virtually no dipping in the muzzle. And now this is the STI Heavy Recoil Master. They make, when I bought this, there was a heavy and a light. So here it is in 600 frames per second. The slide doesn't stay open as long. There is some hesitation, so I don't see a problem there. But me personally, that dual spring system is just too bouncy for me. Granted, this is the Heavy Recoil Master, and if I had the light one, maybe it would perform a little bit different. But it functioned just fine for me. However, personal preference, I just don't care for it. And here it is in super slow motion. There's a good amount of time for the slide to stay open there. It was just an odd feeling, that dual spring system. I can't really describe it. And a lot of this is going to be personal preference too. Now this next one here, this is a 7-pound recoil spring with my minor loads. Now, the only point of shooting minor is for like steel challenge matches, where power factor is really not an issue. These are 135 grain, 40 caliber bullets, going about, I'd say about 115, 120 power factor. Notice the slide doesn't stay open very long, but there's virtually no muzzle rise. And notice how far the brass comes out. It barely comes out. It barely clears my hand. The only problem with shooting a light round, a minor load like this with a super light spring, is if you have your magazine loaded to capacity, the tension on your bullets in your magazine on the bottom of your slide may cause your slide to not have enough force to move backwards, basically. And you won't be able to, it won't function properly. Now, for when I shoot minor like this, I do it with only 10 rounds per magazine because it's usually 10. It's usually steel challenge matches I'm shooting. So with those 10 rounds in there, and I can hold 18 to 19 rounds in my magazine. I'm only half full, so the spring tension on my magazine is not an issue. You know, if you decide to go with a super light recoil spring, just be aware that you can cause some damage to your gun, and there's a few ways around that. Say, here's your guide rod. There's a couple of different methods. The shock buffs, or whatever you want to call them, they're a little polymer thing that fit over the end of your guide rod here, and they're a frame saver, if you will, I think is another term. And they're supposed to deaden the blow, reduce that metal on metal contact where the frame comes back, or the slide comes back and impacts the frame. The only problem I find with these polymer ones is, since they are rubber, it's a hard rubber at that, it feels somewhat bouncy in a way. And remember, this is all personal preference here too. It just depends on what you feel when you shoot the gun. So I find these a little bit bouncy, just a tiny bit. So I like these aluminum ones. It's basically an aluminum shock buff. I think they're called the Aluma shock buffs. As most places, or as I usually do, I get these from Dawson Precision, and they do wear out just like the rubber ones do, or the hard plastic ones. And so I replace them fairly frequently. And what this does, it gives it more of a dead blow. It's still, you get that metal on metal contact where the slide and the frame are contacting, so it feels like you're shooting your gun without any real modifications in it, or without a piece of rubber in there bouncing around. And it saves your frame if you're worried about that. I do run them in my guns. Some guns won't run with a shock buffer at all, so just be aware whether or not you go with plastic or metal. You may put one in there and come to find out your gun will not cycle. Just be aware of that. But you know, grip has a lot to do with it as well. As you notice, I put skateboard tape on the side of my gun, and I'm right-handed, so I put my right-handed thumb on top of the safety, and then I take my weak hand, my left hand, and put it out on that grip safety, and I close this gap right up here between my hands. And with that grip right there, it gives me a lot of the perceived recoil just gone. But a lot of it has to do with that recoil spring as well. And in conjunction with this grip here that I use, and properly springing your gun, if you will, at least the way I like it. And once again, it's personal preference. So what works for me may not work for you. Just be aware of those things about the slide being staying back long enough to strip the next magazine, and you know, aware of that dipping of the muzzle. I remember seeing a younger shooter. He was just fast, so fast, but all his second shots were a D, and in D scoring zones are basically at the bottom of the target, or he missed the target. And I was reviewing some footage because we had filmed the match, and his gun, I think he had a tungsten guide rod, bull barrel 40, and I think he had a super heavy recoil spring. I was watching the video footage, and hit every one of his second shots, the muzzle was way down, and basically he was so fast on the trigger, by the time he broke that second shot, he had not waited for his sight pictures to appear again, and he was breaking that second shot and shooting the ground basically, or shooting real low. So if you can keep that muzzle from going so far down, I think you will get a better sight picture once the gun settles again. You want to avoid that, and recoil springs can help that. But first, get your loads set the way you want, and then spring your gun. Make your gun work to those loads. Well, thanks for watching, and please subscribe for more competition shooting and gun reviews. Thanks.